Welcome back, Hnrs. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and the beginning of our new unit, right? I love this unit, all right? I don't know if y'all seen that TikTok trend running around and stuff like that, but really quick, it's going a little bit like this.
How often do you think about the Roman Empire?
3 times a day.
Yeah, exactly, right? Everybody keeps asking all these people, these random men and stuff like that, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? Well, Mr. PP, Mr. Pierre, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? Well, if you were to ask me how often I think about the Roman Empire, I think about the Roman Empire every single day, all right? I think about it every single day, all the time, constantly, all right? So, mainly just due to the fact that, one, it's my job to think about it. I'm supposed to think about it, right? And right, Pierre, aren't I supposed to think about the Roman Empire? Literally, I teach this stuff, okay? So, the other big thing about it, though, is I think about it constantly because they actually had a major impact on history, right? The language that we speak right now is impacted by the Romans. Our government is heavily impacted by the Romans. Literature of our lives is heavily impacted by the literature of Romans that they stole from Greeks. But we'll get into that a little bit later on. And the big thing about it, though, is we're now moving into probably one of my favorite units to teach all year. So just go ahead, put the seat in, recline, enjoy it because it's going to be awesome, right? So it's going to be awesome because I get to talk about all these crazy stories about all these people that are wearing togas and stabbing each other to death. So now look, big thing about it though is we also need to start talking about where Rome came from, right? So this is our new unit. It's going to be a good moment for you to go ahead and start off a brand new piece of paper. Or if you type your notes, start off not a brand new Google Doc, but a nice brand new page or something like that. Go ahead and grab your favorite color highlighter or pen and really dedicate yourself to the expansion of the ancient Roman Empire, right? So good. All right, so before we start talking, though, we need to actually talk about the beginnings of Rome. Where did Rome come from? Where is Rome going? And where is Rome located? Well, first of all, let's talk about that before we do anything else. Rome is located in the modern-day country of Italy. Now, something you need to understand, though, is that Italy is a decent-sized country. It's actually not that big, like square mileage-wise. But when you're literally looking at, for example, I think it takes up, Louisiana and half of Arkansas. It's, not that big when it comes to square mileage. But the concept of Italy being a country is actually much younger than that of the ancient Roman Empire, right? So the thing you need to understand is that Rome was one city in Italy that grew eventually to expand, not that big, to expand all the way over everything you see right there in red. Or literally, that's how big ancient Rome got. But it started as just one tiny little settlement right here on the Tiber River, right? So why am I so good at teaching this Rome stuff? I don't understand. Literally, that was such a good little parlay into this. So the thing about it that we're now talking about is Italy didn't start as a country until 1861. But the Romans, on the other hand, had been there apparently since 749 AD, right? Or not AD, that would be ridiculous. So 749 BC, okay? The thing about it, though, is before you can really understand Rome, you do have to understand Italy's geography, right? So first and foremost, Italy is about 100 miles wide, and it's only about 700 miles long, okay? Now, looking at the growth of Rome and stuff like that, it is a very small area that could easily be one of two things, if expanded over by one individual city-state and or could actually easily possibly be attacked in the back of your mind is what you're thinking. But the thing that you need to understand about Rome is that it's actually, one, much less rugged. So you're not going to see the geographic isolation issue that the Greeks actually dealt with, right? There are going to be multiple cities, multiple groups of people, multiple tribes that are going to make settlements in Italy, but it's going to be very easy for the Romans to contact them and them to be contacted by the Romans. And we'll actually get into one of those places that takes over Rome for a little while. The last 3 kings of Rome aren't even Roman at all. They're actually Etruscan, and we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. But the big thing about it, though, as well, is that we need to understand is that everything about the geography of Italy is almost the exact opposite of the geography of Greece, right? The geography of Greece was super mountainous, and also it led to that geographic isolation, which is why we had an Athens and a Sparta, right? Whereas in Rome, we're only going to have Rome, because Rome's going to take over everywhere, and then those people will adopt Roman culture. They bring those people in as Roman citizens and stuff like that, and it's just intrinsically very different. And I think it's really important that we actually harp on the differences between Greece and Rome, because a lot of times people tend to lump them together. That's a big thing about honors kids, is y'all are going to actually kind of have to tell the big differences, culturally speaking, of Greece and Rome, whereas if you were to look at their buildings, you would think they're almost the same, right? So going into it, though, like I said, their land is much less rugged, and then Greece making travel much easier, right? But the other key difference between Greece and Italy as well is that Italy doesn't have a lot of natural harbors, right? Where Rome is located, of course, on that Italian peninsula, doesn't have a ton of natural harbors like Greece does. Greece was replete with natural harbors everywhere, all over the place. There's an island, there's an island, there's an island, there's an island. These islands have beaches. These islands have, like, harbors that you can just pull a boat up to, and you can, like, build a dock out to it, and it's very, very easy to trade and do those things constantly in Greece. Whereas in Italy, it's actually very, very cliff-lined coasts, right? And it drops down into the water very, very aggressively. So I'll show you really quick. This right here is one of my favorite cities in Italy. It was actually taken over by the Romans later on, and it's actually known as Cinque Terre, right? And Cinque Terre is an absolutely beautiful city that if you ever get a chance to go to, you totally can. My wife has actually hiked all of the cities of Cinque Terre. There's like 7 of them, and she's gone to all of them and hiked all these different mountainsides and stuff like that. But look at that bad boy. That right there is the Mediterranean Ocean, or no, excuse me, not ocean, Mediterranean Sea right there. But look at these cliff-line coasts. Cliff-line coast just goes wham! It just goes straight down into the water with very few natural harbors whatsoever. So now, interestingly enough, this is going to affect the growth of Rome, though, culturally, militarily, also economically speaking, because intercoastal trade was not very easy for Romans at all. As you can see, you can't really, like, pull up a dock boat and then actually move things off very, very quickly. But what is going to happen, though, it's also going to keep them very, very protected, right? Because it's going to be almost impossible to directly attack Rome in a naval expedition from the outside, right? You can't just, like, pull up a warship and be like, oh, okay, we're going to climb that mountain now. That's not really how it's going to work. So that's going to become really, really important to your understanding of Rome as well, because one day when somebody finally decides to invade Rome, they're going to have to cross a mountain range just to get to them, right? So that's going to actually do a lot for them. It's going to impact them economically and make them less dependent on intersea trade, but it is going to impact them militarily and make them a much more protected civilization, right? Now, trade, though, was easy on land, but it's just not very easy by sea, as you could tell looking at those looking at that coastline, right? Also, the only few natural harbors that existed nearby Italy are on an island right off the coast of Italy. That is actually, to this day, a part of the country of Italy. It's known as the Isle of Sicily, right? Now, some of you who have actually Italian heritage might be like, oh, I think my family is Sicilian, right? Yeah, because during the 1800s, there was a massive amount of Sicilian immigration, right? A huge amount of Sicilian immigration to the United States of people looking for work in an agrarian environment in Italy where things weren't producing very well. Now, the Greeks, though, had actually used those few natural harbors, because something that a lot of y'all actually studied in your last... Oh, God, there we go. A lot of y'all probably actually studied going into that test is the fact that the Greeks love to colonize stuff, right? They love to colonize stuff. They love to set up little villages and areas where they can actually grab goods and bring them back, right? So, like, and that's going to be a big reason why the Persian invasions occur, because there's this area of Ionia, and they're going to, like, be a Greek colony, and of course they're going to rebel against Darius and all this other stuff. But those entire areas, as you can see, they didn't just do the areas around Greece. They also colonized areas of the Black Sea, and they also even colonized as well the island of Sicily and used its natural harbors to move different products in and out of the Mediterranean Sea. Well, this is going to affect the Romans, right? Because it's going to mean that when the Romans found themselves, they're actually going to come into contact with people who have also come into contact with the Greeks. So we're going to see a lot of cultural diffusion of Greek things into Roman society. So another big thing, though, that we need to understand, looking back at ancient Greece, how much of their farmland was how much of their land was actually farmable? Only about 20%. Whereas Roman farming was fantastic. Italy's farmland is so good. All right, so like Italy's farmland in the south, and particularly right around where Rome starts, the southern area, has fantastic soil, right? It has fantastic soil because it has 2 things in it that are going to be very, very important. Well, one, we've already talked about, right? We've already talked about one of these 2 things, silt and the use of floods, right? The thing you need to understand is where Rome founds itself. It founds itself on a series of different hills right above this place called the Tiber River, right? The Tiber River, though, just like the Nile, would annually flood. And when, of course, the river would annually flood, it stirs up all that stuff on the bottom of the river, leaves it and deposits on the soil, deposits it on the soil, and actually, of course, makes farming even better. But a part of the silt that actually is present in Italy is a very important chemical that actually made the farmland in the area super, super good. And it's none other than volcanic ash, right? Volcanic ash is going to make the area, or the farming in Italy, really, 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 really good, right? It's going to make it extremely good just because it's full of so much carbon, right? And carbon is like the essential element of life, and it's what plants need to survive. That and nitrogen as well. The volcanic ash, though, from this like melted rock and magma that would spew itself into the air, deposit itself on the soil and into the river waters, is going to make farming so good in ancient Rome, right? Now, also, though, a lot of y'all are like, oh, Mr. Terry, is this Mount Vesuvius? Well, actually, no, it's not Mount Vesuvius, right? Mount Vesuvius actually is closer to the south, what is now modern-day Naples, and that actually affected because there's a small Roman village there that got destroyed by Mount Vesuvius later on in history, known as Pompeii. Different mountain, though. They actually had like a large volcano to the north of them known as Mount Stromboli, and Mount Stromboli had an active volcano on it for a lot of centuries, and of course, it's going to deposit a lot of volcanic ash, making all the like farming in that area very good. Speaking of other things, though, we need to know as well that Italy has two mountain ranges. Italy has two very expansive mountain ranges that are going to be extremely important to the growth of the ancient Romans. Now, Italy is protected to the north, right, by a very large, chaotic like mountain range known as the Alps, all right? And the Alps are not a chill mountain range. The Alps are massive, okay? They're super big. They constantly have snow on them, and they protect Italy, as you can tell, right up here to this northern area between what is now Italy and Switzerland. But looking at these bad boys, they are huge and jagged and hard to traverse. So it's actually going to keep early Rome protected for quite some time because it's going to be borderline impossible to invade them from the north for several hundred years. Now, a guy's going to try it. He's going to do it, and he's going to walk massive animals over these Alps too. His name is Hannibal Barca, but we'll talk about him a little bit later on, right? So the Alps are going to protect them to the north, and then there's another series of mountains that actually runs Italy from north to south. And they're not going to be too large, but the Romans, when they actually cut through them and built a road for the first time, it was known as the Appian Way, because roads are going to be very important to Romans, okay? But when they actually learned to traverse those mountains, the Apennine Mountains, and cut through and create roads through them, Rome is going to have their pick of everywhere in Italy that they want to take over, right? So going into it, though, also something that we need to understand is that Rome apparently has a founding myth, right? There is myth that comes into the founding of Rome, then there is, of course, history that comes into the founding of Rome. There are the actual people that founded Rome, the nomadic people, just like everybody else did at the time, going into a Neolithic period when a group of people showed up and created a village, and that village eventually grew into something super sophisticated, just like what happened in Athens, just like what happened in Sparta. You got to remember, founding a village and then it grows into a city, which grows into a city-state, which grows into a civilization, it's normal, and that's history, and that's what happens all the time, right? But they have a myth that they cook it down to, right? And the Romans are like, no, we weren't founded by a ragtag group of farmers and stuff like that. We were founded by two brothers, all right? So now look, here's the big elements of the founding myth you need to write in your notes, okay? And we will talk about the actual story, and I'll give you the whole story in class. But the elements of the founding myth that you need to know is, according to Romans, they were founded by two half-man, half-god twins, right? Two twin boys named Romulus, Romulus, and Remus, Reemus. And according to the story, Romulus and Remus were set for death, right? Once they were born, apparently their uncle wanted to have them killed because he thought that they were going to try to dethrone them from some stuff he heard from an oracle, right? And he sent them out to be murdered. And the problem was he was like, soldiers, come and get these babies and like go out there and kill them and then toss them into the river. Well, the soldiers had a change of heart, right? And they were like, I can't kill these squishy little babies. They're adorable. I can't do it. And so they apparently stuck the babies in a, drum roll please, a basket. Right? So like now, and stuck them in the river. Every single ancient civilization has a baby in a basket story, okay? The Hebrews had a baby in a basket story when they talked about Moses, and the Romans have a baby in a basket story when they're talking about their founding of Romulus and Remus. Well, the thing about it is apparently the gods took pity on the children and wanted to save them because they were actually related to the war god Mars, right? We'll get to that whole thing in class as well. But the big thing about it, though, is they were saved then by a she-wolf, right? A she-wolf by the name of Lupa, sent by the gods to keep the babies alive. She nursed them and kept them alive until a shepherd came along, found them, and raised them into adulthood, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is they will eventually overthrow their uncle. We'll talk about that whole thing in class, and they eventually just strike out, and they go off to found the city of Rome on 7 separate hills, right? So speaking of, though, we'll talk about all that stuff in class. We'll talk about how this right here becomes an image of Rome that they're still obsessed with, and that their actual soccer team, FC Roma, it's actually their symbol, right? And that right there, the image of the wolf and the babies is all over Rome, right? So they're very, very, very into it. And now, the real founders of Rome, though, there's the historical founding of Rome. When we're looking at the scientific, the sociological, the archaeological data, we know that they were actually founded by these people called the Latins, right? The Latins showed up, and they're a group of people that created a very, very simple village, right? A Latin, area right next to that Tiber River, right? The Latins were probably a cutoff group of some other areas that wanted to strike out and form their own city, but they were literally known as the Latins. And we have some evidence of some of their earliest huts. Like right there is what Rome started out as, right? They were known as wattle and daub houses, right? Wattle and daub huts. These very simple huts made out of sticks and mud would then eventually grow into be looking like this. Rome when it was still around. So I'm trying to that's a really hard thing to actually put into words. But anyway, when you're looking at Rome though, this is the Rome that it would then grow into, right? The Rome of then, Rome where it was literally just a massive area of temples and white marble and then a military that was just absolutely ferocious and borderline impossible. Stop trying to go backwards and just let me go this way. No. Why are you like this? You're so annoying. There we go. This is what Rome will eventually grow into, right? It'll grow into a massive civilization that peaked in technology and architecture, but it all started out as just like that, right? So that's what Rome started out as, right? And ironically enough, in this area known as the Roman Forum, we have found a bunch of versions of this little that, right? It actually became so important to the Latins whenever you died, you got a small little version of your hut, made a little tiny one, and then they would burn your ashes and shove you inside of it, right? So imagine being buried in a little baby version of your house. It's absolutely hilarious. So going into it though as well, the Latins created cities like that, and that eventually grew into Rome, which was absolutely massive and beautiful, right? And it's a small group of people that broke away from the Latins and founded what is now the area known as Rome, right? So there was a larger Latin civilization, probably closer to the myth itself, near a place called Alba Longa, which meant long hill, and the small group of them break off and make a new settlement, and that was what they would eventually call Rome. But who did they name Rome after? None other than the brother Romulus, right? Romulus apparently was the very first king of Rome, right? Now, the thing about it that you need to understand as well is Rome was founded on a hill overlooking the Tiber River, okay, originally. But then that settlement expanded and grew to cover 7 different hills that would actually help protect them from floods. They founded themselves on hills and put the villages themselves up on hills and stuff like that because the floods of the Tiber River, the annual floods of the Tiber River, would have soaked and destroyed their homes, right? The thing about it, though, is that the settlement grew to cover 7 separate hills, including the ones of Aventine Hill, Palatine Hill, Quirinal Hill, Esquiline Hill, all these different hills, these 7 separate hills are going to be massively important to the civilization of Rome. They were going to later on build walls that protect those areas, and then they start building civic buildings all in those different areas, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But the settlement grew eventually to cover 7 separate hills. Now, these things you need to understand about Romans is they reuse a lot of the images throughout their myths and stuff like that. So when they were keeping history, a lot of times they were like, oh, we had 7 separate hills, and we had 7 kings of Rome, etc., 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 right? So going into it, though, there's another group, though, very close by, and they're known as the Etruscans. And they had already been there, and the Etruscans are going to actually show up at one point, and they're actually going to take them over. And this is a picture I actually took of Rome when I was there. And there's my wife doing a handstand on I think that's Celian Hill or Palatine Hill. No, that would have been on Esquiline Hill. She's actually right there doing a handstand on Esquiline Hill. I actually took that picture right there. So now the interesting thing about it though as well is these people known as the Etruscans who show up. Now the Etruscans actually created city-states to the north of Rome, and they actually began to expand. They traded with the Greeks, and they shared a lot of Greek culture. And what they eventually do is they actually came up with the walls around Rome, and they took over Rome for a small period of time. After Rome was already settled, they actually took over Rome from about 753 BC to about 509 BC, right? But we are going to talk about that in class because I'm exhausted. Today I'm really, really tired, and I want to go get some lunch, and then I want to go watch some football, okay? So the big thing about it is we're going to go ahead and cut it off right there. We'll talk about the Etruscans in class, and I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.